Hello, welcome to Manibel and to my continued deconstruction of Bernardo Kastrup's article, The Universe in Consciousness. And we are at chapter 10, and it's called At What Level Does Cosmic Dissociation Occur? Well, if you have to tell me, I don't care. Right? It's like this is a kind of mysticism. Mysticism is recognized by you not being able to think your way to whatever it is being claimed, but you have to go and listen to the person claiming it, right? Or maybe that's not a definition of mysticism, but it's a manifestation of the consequences of mysticism, right? You have to go and listen to Bernardo Kastrup telling you where this dissociation that he came up with is and where it occurs and what is going on, right? I'll have to deduce that that's what he wants. It's an artificial kind of demand, right? He is now in demand if he can convince people of this shit, right? Because then they will have to come to him and hear his preachings. There is no mysticism that I am aware of that makes you able to think this way yourself, to arrive at these conclusions by yourself, right? Otherwise you would say, of course I have already thought that, right? No, you're saying, that's interesting. I have never heard of that before. Let me listen to Bernardo Kastrup telling me how I should understand the world, right? Be very, 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 very careful with people who are not saying, of course you should think for yourself, right? Of course and if there's something that about your thinking that you're unclear of how to approach, you might want some guidance, you might want some inspiration, but don't let somebody else tell you, aha, and therefore you should trust what I tell you, right? It's sort of, it's mysticism cloaked in philosophy and science. If I can't think my way to it myself, I don't care about it. I don't want anybody saying, yeah, you can't think your way you can't experience your way to that external world. So now you have to sit and listen to me coming up with sort of shit about what is going on there, right? I don't buy any of that. Now, I have to say, I can encourage you to try to think for yourself. That's all I can do, right? Really. That's basically the purpose of my channel, is to tell you nobody is here to save you except yourself. And if you can't think your way to it, don't just trust that somebody else can, because you're basically saying, if you're in a situation where you can't think any further about a particular aspect of your thinking, then you're saying, I'm not good enough. But you would then consider yourself good enough to judge whether or not somebody else can tell you about that which you're not good enough to think about, right? That sounds like a stupid argument, right? So be content with your own thinking, and don't just accept anything, and be very careful that you're not just confirmation bias, right? That and that's also a rabbit hole of this Bernardo Kastrup thinking, right? Thinking, quote. That it taps into religion, it taps into this kind of, it taps into people who already have some kind of mystic approach, that they get what they want. As soon as he says God, then they are satisfied, because then they're home safe, then they're sort of home base or whatever it's called, right? It's sort of, okay, as soon as he mentions God, they have what they need, right? and they're only going to check, does it sound completely crazy what he says? No, it doesn't sound completely crazy. In fact, it sounds kind of rigid. It sounds both philosophical and scientific, and that's just what they want, right? They want mysticism clothed in philosophy and science so that you can, it's sort of protective layer of mysticism, right? You cloak yourself in sophistry, basically. If you're using philosophy and science to cloak that the core of what you're thinking is basically mystic, then you are a sophist. You're pushing an argument in front of a potentially something that looks like a good and valid argument in front of bullshit, right? And it's extremely prevalent, right? When it all comes down, what people usually are most concerned about is, does this challenge what mommy and daddy told me? Does this challenge what mommy and daddy told me, right? And I'm repeating myself, I guess. And people repeat themselves when they try to think while they're talking, right? Not necessarily to sound profound, bullshit bingo, right? Does this challenge what mommy and daddy told me? And usually it's about mommy, right? And does it support or challenge, you could say, right? If it supports mommy and daddy, fine. I don't care how crazy the sophistry is, as long as it says God somewhere or whatever it is, right? It could also be science. I mean, in some cases, it seems like science has become another kind of religion, right? To some people at least, right? So it's fraught with psychology. People just want to have their bullshit confirmed, right? They don't want to do the hard work of thinking for themselves. And that's possibly why my channel is not popular, because I'm not feeding anybody their ego, right? I'm critical of everything. Everything. Nothing slips through my net. There's nothing, there's nobody I would say, no, I can't challenge that, right? Yeah, if people threaten me with murder, like, Bernardo Kastrup has done implicitly, right? Because he doesn't have a backbone to come and face me directly, right? He wants to use his government friends to threaten me into submission. Hope that I will go away, right? So you don't challenge his bullshit. Because if it's not bullshit what he's doing, he would say, give me your best shot, right? You can deconstruct from now until your dying day. You can deconstruct my shit, right? And you can take all of it. And I will even come on your show and help you deconstruct it if that's the case, right? I would say that. I would say that if it was my philosophy. But if it's based on bullshit, right? And I might be able to point out the bullshit. You want to destroy the deconstructor so that he shuts the fuck up and goes away. Because deep down you know that you're full of shit, right? And that guy might point it out. If you're not full of shit, you want your philosophy to be rigid. And one of the ways that philosophy becomes rigid is when other people try to deconstruct it. It's a kind of free market peer review of your shit, right? One of the ways that software becomes better is that there are hackers out there, right? They try to hack into your software. And when they find a hole in your software, they're basically saying, hey, dude, there's a hole in your software, right? But if somebody wants to get away with shitty software, they want to destroy the hackers, right? I'm a philosophical hacker, you could say. I try to find holes and gateways through their potential shitty philosophy. And of course they want to kill me, right? They don't want to have that bullshit, open up for all to see. Okay, enough of that rant. Let's get back to the main course here. The challenge we must now address is the so-called boundary problem for experiencing subjects. What measurable structures in nature? Well, you have created a realm beyond your experience. You haven't even created it. You have just started talking as if you don't even have to talk about it. You don't even have to justify it or anything like that. You started out by calling it reality. Apparently, that reality is outside your experience, right? And you now call it also cosmic consciousness and all these various terms that are being thrown around. But because you have decided that you're going with this idea of an external world without clarifying, now you need to clarify why you're dissociated from that which you haven't clarified, why you get to talk about it. It's kind of weird, right? It's like saying, I have been sitting here in my living room all my life. I think there is an elephant outside my room. I have to figure out why I can't see the elephant. But you don't know if there's a fucking elephant. You don't even know if there's something outside your living room, right? If you've been sitting there all your life. And if you figure out I can't get outside my living room, why would I actually care about that world I can't get to? It doesn't matter if there's an elephant out there. It doesn't hurt me. I can't get to it. Whatever. It doesn't matter. Why do I need to figure out why I'm dissociated from that elephant if I can't get to it anyway? Right? It's this, it's a sort of mental masturbation. It's like I can almost see him sitting there with a smile on his face and say, oh, I am doing this mental straining work that is, I'm trying to twist my mind around into, yes, it's made up of dissociation. It's like, oh man. I cannot possibly imagine this guy is interested in any kind of aspect of what I would call the real world, right? As far as I understand, he has a hobby of reinstalling old computers, right? Like, 1970s, vintage computers, right? Which is sort of a very, very geeky kind of hobby, I would say. But, fine. But a computer is basically a bunch of metal and, bunch of plastic and switches that are very sort of logical, and it's very, this needs to go there, otherwise it won't work kind of thing, right? And either it doesn't, computers and software, either it works or it doesn't work, right? It's sort of a either or kind of world. And I just sort of had a thought some while back that I find it kind of interesting that his philosophy is very fluffy, though he tries to be scientific about it, right? But it's kind of fluffy, what if kind of thinking. But he's interested in these old computers that either work or don't work, right? It's very sort of black and white kind of hobby, right? So it's an interesting sort of dichotomy, an interesting kind of I don't know what word to put on it, but never mind, right? Let's get back to the text here. What measurable structures in nature correspond to, that is, are the revealed appearance of? Okay, so now he's saying you can't get to it, right? But there's something in nature. What didn't he use? What is nature? Isn't this the first time he uses nature? What is that now? Why do you need another word now? How do you know it corresponds if you can't get to the other one, which you suppose it is corresponding to, that you haven't established how to get to that external world, as I keep pointing out, right? So now you can say about what is in your world that is corresponding to that which you can't get to. So you can't get to a correspondence, right? Because all you can refer to in that correspondence is either another experience or some kind of abstraction from your experiences, like ripples or fields or balls or whatever, right? I don't buy this. He is creating circular arguments upon what ifs, and I think it's something like this, and it doesn't matter. It's completely useless, this. It's absolutely and utterly useless, right? Completely useless. Alters of cosmic consciousness. As we have seen, Shani points that elementary particles are akin to micro-level alters, which in turn come together to compose higher-level relative subjects. However, as already mentioned, I believe this to be an unnecessary convoluted notion. Instead, I submit that cosmic dissociation Cosmic dissociation happens precisely at the level of living beings with unitary consciousness such as you and me. And you and I are alters of cosmic. So he submits. Submit is not, are you handing in a paper? I'm handing over a statement here. It's a sort of a what if statement. Or I think it's something like this. This is a scientific approach. Science is basically guessing what might be going on in that which you cannot directly experience, but which is responsible for why things move about the way they do, right? It's the invisible force of gravity of Newton that turns into space is bending around stuff, creating gravity, right? But you're not experiencing space, right? It needs to have a color, a sound, and so on, right? It has none of these. To the best of my understanding, right? So you're saying, okay, but then the story behind it is, I think that space is doing this. And when I try to calculate from my abstractions of fields and whatever, right? Which is also an abstraction. You don't experience fields, right? Fields are actually two-dimensional layers put into some kind of three-dimensional understanding, right? And you could just go, what is a layer? Well, what is it? These are abstractions. So science is based on a core of abstraction from which formulas are created. Because abstractions are pure in the sense that they can be used to calculate and create formulas that can sort of help predict what is going to happen in the future, right? It can assist you. It's not something you have to follow, right? Nobody says just because I did some science, you have to follow my science. I understand that most people think of it this way. That's just bullshit, right? That's a religious kind of authoritarian approach to science. That's why somebody like Fauci during the COVID scam said, you have to trust the science. It's the new religion. You have to do as your masters tell you, right? It's basically creating a story that you can't get to, that is responsible for those events you are experiencing or you are interpreting from how things move about in your experience, right? That core of abstractions is what enables you to go and do mathematics about it, right? You create a field, then you can start to calculate, right? You create little balls, you create little lines, you create little areas and so on, right? And then you describe it using mathematics. It's in order to get going with mathematics and quantifying that you have to create these abstractions. But that doesn't mean that these abstractions is out there beyond your experiences, right? That's the fallacy he falls prey to. He puts his abstractions beyond his experiences. For some reason, he might think that, I don't think he does that, but some people might think that way, that the abstraction also arrives through your experiences. They don't. They are extracted from your experiences by your mind. They're creations within your mind. So you can't go and place them out there. You have to accept that you are working within the frame of this mind of yours, right? And the base level is solipsist. There's no way to get around it. It's only about how you approach your solipsist experience. Right? I am just having experiences now. I feel that I'm responsible for creating the sounds that I'm also recording on this apparatus, this thing I call my MacBook. But it's still a set of experiences, right? It's colors, it's sounds, I could taste it also, right? And so on. Feel it, and it's sort of kind of hot now. It's been going for a while, right? So it's just a set of experiences, and from that I have extracted a cognitive concept called MacBook. That's all I have, right? A person is also an experience, right? And so on. When you start to say that person is outside my experience, then there's a big leap there. There's a humongous leap. You are creating the idea of an external world based on something that isn't an external world. Otherwise, you're completely screwed in this sort of, then everything flows, right? Then you're basically, then you stay in solipsism, right? Fine. I mean, don't tell me what. Let me tell you what to do, right? I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just trying to clarify how I think, right? So if you say my experience is outside, you're violating something, because if it's an experience, it's just an experience, right? You have access to the experience. Otherwise, you wouldn't talk about the experience, right? So when you say it's outside, where did that dichotomy all of a sudden arrive from? Because it's a sort of a black and white, it's either or kind of a binary thinking, right? It's like this thing is inside and there's also an outside. So if you say this person is outside, you cannot be talking about that which you're referring to, right? Because that must then be inside, unless you are outside everything and there's an inside you don't have access to. That sounds weird, right? Then it sort of sounds like solipsism, where there's a core of you that you don't have access to. So the outside must be sort of concentric beyond your own experience. How did you get to that? That's the question I want answered, right? How do you get to that? If you have this pretense of it's just there, I don't fucking buy it, right? And this is this extreme shortcoming of this article, or what's it called, a paper here, right? That it doesn't clarify how he gets to it. It's like there's all sorts of foundational stuff that are taken for granted, but then he can, mindfuck himself about some kind of dissociation, right? That is based on something that isn't argued. He might have done it somewhere, but then please tell me where he has made the argument. All I have heard is you have to work with it. It must be there. You can't argue it away, or something along those lines. Those are not good arguments, right? I'm still searching for that argument, and maybe I might have stopped with the first chapter where he says just reality out of nowhere, right? And say, okay, this article is probably not going to help me, right? So it seems to me that this is just a very quick sort of half-ass scientific pretense, philosophical pretense of an argument of how to get to analytic idealism, which is the term he uses for his kind of thinking here, right? I don't find this thing he's doing here particularly rigid or anything like that. He takes some very, very, very big claims for granted, and then he fly fucks some little aspects he needs to fly fuck in order to avoid attacks of his philosophy, right? But there are so many shortcomings in this kind of thinking that at this point I'm basically saying metaphysics, if metaphysics is the thinking about what is beyond your experience, is completely ridiculous and futile, right? It's a fruitless kind of thinking. Whatever you might come up with can only be some kind of abstraction, right? And abstractions are based on experiences, right? So abstractions is going on the inside of that dichotomy you apparently have established. So whatever you can describe that outside with are either experiences which would be illegal, right? From your own establishment of the dichotomy. Then the only other possibility is using some kind of abstraction that is so sufficiently abstract compared to direct experiences that people might fall for the trap of accepting that these abstractions, sort of geometric shapes or fields or something like that, right, ripples, they might actually be some kind of idea of representation, but they are just grabbed out of his ass, man, right? It's because he wants something to be there, right? He's just coming up with whatever. It almost feels like he's coming up with whatever he can get away with that doesn't violate other kinds of ideas of what might be out there, right? I don't buy any of that. Okay, let me take this one again. Cosmic dissociation happens. Is it something that happens? So it happens is that it goes from not being there to being there, right? So he can talk about a change outside his experiences of what arrives that is responsible for keeping away from that which is responsible. It's like me coming up with an idea of why I've been sitting in this living room all my life, and I'm coming up with a story about how this wall over there was established. And it was established from the outside, and there's something on the outside responsible for keeping my side of the wall where it is. So I'm just talking about something I don't have access to, right? He's basically, as I said, he's basically being a scientist about it. Science is not valid in metaphysics or ontology, right? The scientific approach of coming up with theories and stories about what is going on is not philosophy, because philosophy has to establish what you have access to, right? Because if you are using scientific approach, coming up with what ifs that then later can be used to sciences which are also what ifs, then you are basing a what if on another what if, right? Therefore, philosophy has to be based on what you have access to and nothing else, right? That's why I'm saying what is important is the ontology of your experience. Otherwise, it's just self-mind-fucking, mental masturbation and coming up with shit you want to be there because you don't like that you don't have an explanation of this, that, and the other, right? You have to accept that there are certain aspects you can never get to. And the futile thing about it is that You pounding on this thing that you don't have access to takes your focus away from that which you actually have access to and can make some judgment about and do some actual philosophy that might in the end turn out into a moral principle that is functional. Rather than sitting there masturbating your own mind, coming up with stories about something you don't have access to, right? Ah, man. Okay, there are several arguments for this. The first has already been hinted at. Given that this we, speak about yourself, you have access to your own experience, right? Be humble about it. Don't enforce the shit on me by saying we, right? Which you are implying by using we. Given that we ordinarily experience an integrated phenomenal field, there is no direct reason to conjecture that this field is a composite of lower level constituents. Secondly, we have seen that von Neumann's reasoning regarding quantum measurement implies that the entire inanimate universe must be one unfathomable von Neumann chain, that is, an entangled, indivisible whole. As such, it is arbitrary, physically speaking, to carve out any segment of the inanimate universe and posit it to be the revealed appearance of an alter. Von Neumann did, however, exclude conscious living organisms from the embrace of von Neumann chains, since at least we, conscious human beings, clearly can perform quantum measurements. I'm not performing quantum measurements. I don't care about quantum measurements. In fact, I would like people not to steal my money so they can go and do quantum measurements in a Large Hadron Collider, right? If you want to make quantum measurements, do it for your own money, right? Don't spend my money on shit I don't want. On this basis, only conscious living organisms can correspond to alters of cosmic consciousness, not elementary particles or any other subset of the inanimate universe. Thirdly, as observed by Matthews, the individuation of objects is not consistently okay, and there's also one thing that this alludes to, right? Imagine the amount of reading he needs to do when he draws in science, which is in itself a fallacy to draw in science into ontology and metaphysics. It is bad thinking, right? But imagine all the science then he needs to read up on in order to be on par with whatever all these other people are thinking, in order for him to be accepted in the academic club, right? It's this sort of Mensa club of very intelligent people, sort of circle jerking their own and each other's minds in order to say, I'm also smart. I can name drop all these. I'm a member of the club, ain't I? I'm also in the club. Yes. Take what we call a car. Though based on structural and functional reason that helps the business of transportation. Transportation is an interpretation, right? Its delineation is ultimately arbitrary. Is it? How can you take a car if its delineation is arbitrary? Then we can't agree upon the car, can we? So its delineation, so if I go and ride in Bernardo Kastrup's car, it's just about the arbitrariness of the delineation. It might actually also be my car, sort of thing, right? It could say it's sort of ultimates an arbitrary delineation. You're saying it's your car. No, it's also my car because it's sort of it's standing on the earth, and I'm also standing on the earth. And we're both on the same earth, so we inhabit the same earth, so I'm also inhabiting the car, so it's also my car, right? So I can just go and ride in his car. I would think that he doesn't like that, right? All of a sudden, it would be very strict and not arbitrary delineations, right? Full of shit, man, right? If one argues that, say, the spark plugs are integral to the car because without them the car cannot function, by the same token one would also have to include the fuel that makes the engine run, the environment air that allows combustion. No, but there are various aspects of that concept you are referring to called car. There is no, you're talking as if you're a materialist now, right? There is a objective car there. But now you're talking about some external world where things are independent of whether or not you and I are experiencing them. That's a fallacy you have refuted by doing idealism, man, right? Okay, man. This guy is fucking crazy, man. I have to experience car in order to talk about car. I can talk about the concept of car, and I might have an idea of what kind of experiences and qualia I would expect to have if I was having the concept of car cognized, right? But there is no way a car is supposed to be understood. You can only say, you can make a proposition to somebody else. I am experiencing car by pointing and saying, that's a car. And then that other person or other persons need to say true or false. And you can't even know if they're lying, right? That's the problem of other minds. So you have to say, well, car. Bernardo says car, and I say false. So to me, there isn't a car, right? So you can't say, yes, there is car. That is an objective car. No, you're referring to your experiences, right? So what are you talking about? You're talking about your experience and treating it as if it's an outside world. So now you're fucking violating your own philosophy here, right? It's absolutely fucking stupid, man, right? It's so stupid, it's beyond stupid, man, right? Token one would also have to include the fuel that makes the engine go the road, the environment, air, but air is not particular to the car. The spark plugs is particular to car, right? You can't have car without spark plugs, but you can have car without air, right? You might say, if I pull out the spark plugs of the car, it I would still identify it as a car, possibly. Well, yes, sure. But the air was there before car was there. But spark plugs weren't there before car was there, right? He's a sophist now. This is sophistry. This is hardcore sophistry. It's there to confuse you into saying there is just arbitrary delineations. Don't trust your own ideas. Put your arms down about your own ability to philosophize and let me inflict my philosophy on you, right? Fuck off. The decision of where to stop is motivated by convenience. No, it's motivated by whether or not you are experiencing car. If you say you are experiencing car, if you are experiencing car, you are experiencing car in the sense that you are cognizing car. You could argue whether or not it's an action and an experience. Car is an experience, or whether or not these particular experiences have been associated somehow with the concept car in that particular aspect of your experience. That's the cognition. Is a cognition an experience? We could discuss that, but let's just say that all of it is experience. The car and the colors, and it's all experience, just to use the same term, right? But you need to have the cognition of car in order to talk about car. So what is it that may make you cognize car? How can you get to that? You're just cognizing car for some reason that you're not in control of, right? So if you're experiencing car, you're experiencing car. Who gives a fuck whether or not this arbitrary, this, that, and the other? You were experiencing car. I suppose that you're not sitting around in the air on the ground expecting to be driven around, right? There's certain aspects of this you call car. In order, you have to cognize in a particular way in order for you to make some decisions about what to do with that particular experience or that particular cognition, right? This is sophistry. This is hardcore sophistry. It is there to confuse you into lower down your own thinking so he can inflict his own thinking on you, right? Be careful. The decision where to stop is motivated by convenience. An analogous rationale applies to whether or not we distinguish the handle from the mug, the hood from the jacket, the river from the ocean, and so on. This relative arbitrariness in the way we delineate but it's like we have to agree upon it. It's like there has to be one answer. This is the car and this is not a car, right? He cannot allow for disagreement of where a car starts and where it stops and so on, right? It's sort of implicit in the thinking, and he's using that to his benefit to say, well, nobody can say what a car is then, right? Because the car needs the whole universe in order to be functioning, whatever, right? But the function of something is not the cognition of something, right? The cognition might have been arrived at in the earlier stages of your being, your existence and your memory of that existence, in order to arrive at the cognition or the concept that you're using to cognize with. But it's not the function that delineates your cognition. That's just your cognitive apparatus that is apparently is cognizing car. As he just said in the beginning of this, right? He said, take what we call a car. That is saying, I am experiencing car. Pretend that you're experiencing car. Then you're cognizing car. So you're just saying, I have perfect understanding of car here. And then he's trying to throw the spanner in the works and saying, well, you can't trust this, you can't trust that, you can't trust this. But how the hell did you get to car then? Right? Oh my God. He's a fucking master sophist, right? This relative arbitrariness in the way we delineate their boundary renders inanimate objects problematic candidates for the revealed appearance of all sorts of cosmic consciousness. After all, in Matthew's words, the boundaries between subjects are not nominal. Now, but you can't trust these scientists, right? When you're dealing with this level of thinking. Because they are possibly screwing up the ideas of where things are. They treat concepts as something that has some kind of, quote, objective existence out there. And, subjective, objective, all this is sort of, it is, that's why you need to get a grasp of your experience, right? You have to have a fucking rigid ontology that also makes you unable to say, no, I don't trust what you're saying, but you seem to be screwing up what I consider good ontology, right? So you can very quickly figure out whether or not people are actually doing some good thinking or not, right? So I encourage you to put this, mental masturbation of metaphysics on hold and focus on your ontology, right? Okay. Our ability to perceive ends at the surface of a body, our skin, retinas, eardrums, tongue, and the mucous lining of our nose. We cannot perceive photons hitting a wall or air pressure oscillation bouncing off a window, but we can perceive those impinging on our retinas. But you are just coming up with a story that there's some impinging. How do you get to impinging? you're talking about that which goes on before you have an experience of it. How can you talk about that? You can't talk about that. But if it's sort of built into your, what if there is an outside? Well, then I'm changing the what if there is an outside to there is an outside. And therefore it must be impinging, right? So it's the what if built on another what if that is built on another what if. I have no patience with this, right? Moreover, our ability to act through direct phenomenal intention also ends at the surface of the body. We can move our arms, legs, and simply by conscious intending to move them. However, we cannot do the same with tables and chairs. Clearly, thus, the delineation of our body is an empirical fact. An empirical fact. Are there other kinds of facts? But fact, how does fact relate to knowledge, right? And isn't this a circular argument, right? Isn't this a begging the question kind of thing? You're talking about a fact. A delineation is a fact. But you have to have that which is those aspects that are being delineated between as facts before you can say that the delineation is a fact. And the delineation is just where two different kinds of concepts meet. Isn't that just saying that they are not the same? They are meeting each other here. The loudspeaker over there is delineated by the wall I consider to be behind it, but they're sort of close to each other in my conceptual mapping of whatever is in the experience, right? The delineation isn't there as such. It's because there are two different colors close to each other that I'm talking about a delineation, right? But I'm still talking about my experience, right? All this is talking about, he is pretending that, of course, there is no problem of other minds. That's just given that I can talk to my experience and expect there to be other minds understanding my judgment, and I'm going to go with the idea that other people have the similar kind of experiences. And he hasn't described these kinds of axioms in his philosophy anyway, to begin with, right? So there's a lot of foundational stuff that he just takes for granted, which is where I would be very cautious about what I'm doing, right? I understand that take into consideration that when I'm sitting here talking about it, I am not doing a philosophical paper like he's doing. I am deconstructing, right? And I'm alluding to various aspects of my own philosophy not in a rigid manner, in the same way as if I was writing an article or writing a book or whatever. I would be very careful about taking nothing for granted, right? Because nothing is granted, right? As Descartes says, well, is there some particular understanding I should have of my experiences? No, there's no understanding. It might just be somebody screwing with me and implanting shit on my awareness that I'm just giving a meaning out of nowhere, right? But at least I'm aware of these experiences that I can't be sure what they are supposed to mean. But I'm aware of them. I think, therefore I am. There is something thinking. There is something that is aware, right? You can't, if you let go of that, there's nothing left. He is down there where you can't go any further without stopping to think. Because if you say, yeah, well, I can't even trust my thinking, well, okay, then there's nothing. Then it's gone. Poof, there's nothing left. But he says, at least there is an awareness. There's some thinking thing. Thing is also a bad choice of words here, right? There's at least some thinking going on, some awareness of an experience. That awareness is there. No matter what it is aware of, right? that is potentially your starting point. He is way ahead of that, right? He doesn't think he needs to do that. He wants to get to his dissociation disorder, right? So he can, implant shit in you that he wants you to have implanted, right? Okay. Clearly, thus, the delineation of our body is an empirical fact. I don't buy that, right? I don't accept that. I cannot just decide that the chair I'm sitting on is integral to my body. In the way I can decide that the handle is integral to the mug. No, but you are alluding to some kind of objective mark in an external world to your experiences. You are appealing to that paradox that you are basically refuting, talking about idealism. I don't fucking get how he can be so confused. This is a telltale sign that he is screwed in his foundations. He doesn't understand what he's doing. But he needs to have this materialist approach to a connection between an external world and science. Otherwise, he doesn't have anything to go with here, right? So he has to screw up the boundaries of this, right? He has to violate the inside-outside dichotomy in order to convince you that he can talk about some correspondence between something he doesn't have access to and that which he actually has access to, right? I cannot just decide that the handle is integral to the mug. Neither can I decide that a patch of skin of my skin is not integral to my body. In the way I can decide that the hood is not integral to the jacket. The criterion here is not merely a functional or structural one, but the range of phenomenality, sensory perception, intention intrinsically associated with our body. Based on this objective criterion, there is no freedom to move boundaries at will. I don't buy this. This is simply not good argumentation structure. It tries to confuse that which is your cognitive apparatus that either identifies X or doesn't identify as X. And this is super important in my philosophy, right? Not that there's something that is sort of less important, but this is a cornerstone of my understanding of knowledge, Be careful that you listen close to how I frame this. My understanding of knowledge, right? If you want to go with this, be my guest. But be honest with yourself, right? Just be honest with yourself and say, well, what am I basing these kinds of thinkings on? Am I just eating raw what he says because I want it to be the case? Or am I actually trying to get to a deeper understanding what he's actually doing and pointing out flaws in his thinking that might allude to he's not really interested in good philosophy. Rather, he's interested in coming up with a story that fits his psychology or something like that, right? Just be honest with yourself, right? What these considerations suggest is clear. The physical boundary of the body is the revealed appearance. No. There's nothing that is revealed. It's like he's using words here. He's just starting to use another word that has a particular connotation and understanding, and you are being lured into thinking, now he has established it, just because he started to use a particular word, right? Be careful, man, right? Is the real appearance of the dissociative boundary of the phenomenal field. And insofar as we can assume that all living organisms have phenomenal inner life in some way akin to our own, the conclusion can be generalized. Living organisms are the revealed appearance of alters of universal consciousness. I don't buy it, right? Because of all these shortcomings of his way of arguing, that first of all, the whole endeavor of this kind of metaphysics is futile, right? You're basically attempting to use your experiences and abstraction from that experience to describe that which you don't have access to beyond your experience. You can't do it, right? And the problem is that because you don't have experiential access to it, these people can come up with basically all they want, whatever they want. And you can't challenge it because you can't go there and check it. You can't go there, experience, and say, no, there are no ripples. I am looking at it now and these are not ripples. This is the trick. This is the mystic trick. Creating a world that the little people don't have access to, and then the priest is going to tell you, yeah, I have access because my mind is so brilliant. I can think my way using my experiences and abstractions and models and theories and science and God knows what, compile it into one big, whatever, Jabba the Hutt kind of philosophy, right? And then saying, aha, it is... physical boundary of the body is revealed as appearance of the dissociative boundary of our phenomenal field. So what, right? At the end of the day, as I keep repeating, the tomatoes are still the tomatoes when I go down to the grocery store, right? Even if I say the physical boundary of this tomato is the revealed appearance of the dissociative boundary of the phenomenal field of mind. So what? Right? I mean, so what? Okay, let me say I accept your story about what is going on beyond my experiences. Does it change my experience? No. I still have to go down and buy these fucking tomatoes, right? I have to go into my car and expect it to not have arbitrary boundaries or something like that. Trust that the spark plugs will work all the way down to the grocery store where I expect to find the tomatoes. And it's the same fucking tomatoes when I read this article and accepted this weird philosophy, right? Nothing changes in your real life, right? Nothing. There's no approach to the direct experience or to the experience of tomato that is altered or changed or validated or anything like that by whatever might have been going on before I had the experience of the tomato, right? So it's completely useless. It's absolutely fucking useless, this, right? He might sit there and feel good about himself and have some feeling that I have settled what is going on beyond my experiences. I don't like to have this realm I don't have access to. It's a daunting thought that there is some world out there. I need to think and come up with a story about what is going on. And all you will then end up doing is inflicting your psychology and your upbringing and your mommy and your daddy and whatever into this world, right? I don't buy any of it. And insofar as we can assume that all living or have phenomena in our life in some way akin to our own, I have already read this. The concept by virtue of cosmic dissociation. Living organisms are the revealed. They are carved out of their context by virtue of cosmic dissociation. Man. Oh, another, Freudian slip, right? The virtue of cosmic dissociation. So he's implanting virtue into that. Oh my God, man. Oh, man. Do I need to say more? But can we assume that all living creatures... I think I'll have to stop here. So we're getting close to the mark here, to the 1 hour mark. So I'll leave you here and say, see you in the next one. Because this is apparently a longer chapter than I'm used to, right? And I'm talking a lot. So please share, like, and subscribe. Comment. or consider donation. Otherwise, see you in the next one.